The colonel's voice shattered the silence. "We're out of pilots." The lights flickered, shadows shifted, and for a moment it felt like the entire hangar had stopped breathing. Dozens of soldiers froze. No one moved. No one dared. Until a single pair of grease-stained boots stepped forward. Sometimes war doesn't ask who's trained. It asks who's willing. You're watching the storyscape, where impossible orders collide with unforgettable courage. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The desert base was falling apart. Ammunition gone, comms breaking down, and enemy armor closing fast. Every man inside the hangar knew the numbers didn't add up. They weren't going to hold. When the colonel announced the truth, no pilots left, the words hit harder than any shell. Men looked at each other in silence. The A-10 sat waiting, its nose art grinning like a cruel joke. But without a pilot, it was just metal and paint. The SEALs braced for the fight to come, checking magazines that were nearly empty. No one dared speak. The quiet meant death was already walking toward them. Then the lights flickered, and from the shadows, she stood. A mechanic, grease-stained fatigues, no name on the roster, but in her eyes burned something that refused to die. She had spent years keeping these jets alive when others only flew them. If anyone knew the Hog's secrets, it was her. "Sir," she said firmly, voice cutting through the panic, "the Hog's ready. I can take her up." The colonel's jaw clenched. He wanted to dismiss her. Protocol demanded it, but outside the hangar, the rumble of enemy armor grew louder. Time was gone. Choices were gone. The SEAL leader stared at her, measuring the courage in her stance. He gave a single nod. In seconds, she was moving like muscle memory. Ground crew snapped to her orders. Power on, pins out, panels closed. Boots thundered across the hangar floor as if the war itself had shifted direction. She climbed the ladder and dropped into the cockpit, hands finding switches she had touched 1,000 times, though never in combat. Battery on. APU start. The jet coughed, then roared to life. The soldiers outside the canopy stared in disbelief, watching the impossible unfold. The colonel muttered something no one heard, because by then, the Hog was awake, and the battlefield had a new heartbeat. The roster said she wasn't a pilot. The sky was about to disagree. Engines spooled, lights came alive, and the old war machine trembled as if eager to fight again. She whispered to it like an old friend, "One more flight." The canopy sealed, and the desert night became hers. The runway stretched ahead, cracked but straight. The kind of path you only walk once if you fail. Brakes released. Throttles surged forward. The Hog roared against the dark, dragging hope with it. Soldiers on the ground shielded their eyes from the dust storm as the beast clawed into the sky. For the first time all night, silence broke, not from despair, but from disbelief. And then, as the landing gear tucked in, a warning light blinked red on her panel. Fuel. Far less than the gauges had promised. Someone had sabotaged the Hog. The A-10 lifted into the black desert air like a battered prizefighter refusing to stay down. The roar of its twin engines rolled across the base, and every soldier who thought the night was lost suddenly felt their spine straighten. But Arden's eyes weren't on them. Her focus was locked on the instrument panel. Fuel. The gauge blinked red, screaming that the tanks were nearly dry. She knew what that meant. Someone had drained her Hog, or worse, left her just enough to die in the air. Either way, she had minutes, not hours. And minutes was all she was willing to take. Courage doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It moves when the odds are poison. She leveled out low, hugging the desert floor. Dust swirled as the hog carved a path through the night air that reeked of smoke and burning fuel. Below, enemy armor crawled toward the valley like an iron river. Arden's jaw tightened. If they reached the base before she struck, everyone down there would be erased. She toggled the master arm. The familiar click steadied her nerves like a pulse under her hand. The GAU-8 cannon loomed silent in the nose, hungry for work. She breathed, steady and precise, as she flipped switches with the discipline of someone who had lived inside this cockpit longer than she'd lived anywhere else. Her headset crackled. A voice she recognized. Senior Chief from the SEAL unit. "Whoever you are up there, listen. We've got men pinned on the ridge. If you don't clear that armor, they're gone." His voice shook, but it wasn't fear. It was the weight of men waiting on one shot of hope. Arden's throat was dry. She pressed transmit. "Copy. Stay low, watch for the smoke." The radio fell silent, but she could feel 100 pairs of eyes staring up at her, believing in someone they didn't even know. She yanked the hog into a banking turn, engines howling. The stars tilted, the earth swung up, and the convoy filled her canopy. A dozen vehicles, headlights like fangs cutting through dust. She lined the pipper over the lead tank, thumb hovering over the trigger. And then, static. Her HUD flickered. The targeting system froze. For a heartbeat, she saw nothing but lines of green fuzz. Her stomach dropped. Without the HUD, she was blind. The hog's ancient systems weren't supposed to fail like this. Not now. Not tonight. When the machine betrays you, all that's left is instinct. Her hands remembered what the screen forgot. She dropped the nose, eyes tracking, not through the glass, but through feel, the way the hog always told her where it wanted to go. Wind buffeted, alarms screamed. She ignored them all. At 2,000 feet, she squeezed the trigger, and the GAU-8 finally spoke. The cannon's voice wasn't a sound, it was a storm. 7 barrels spun, spitting fire and tungsten. The night ripped open with a sound like the earth breaking in half. Below, the lead tank disintegrated, metal folding inward before flames erupted. The convoy scattered, vehicles braking, men jumping into the dirt. The SEALs on the ridge shouted into their comms, "Hit! Direct hit! Do it again!" Hope wasn't just back, it was contagious. But Arden wasn't celebrating. The fuel warning glared brighter, louder. She had 1, maybe 2 more passes before the hog became a coffin. She banked again, engines growling, and lined up for another strike. The second burst rained fire across the desert floor, shredding trucks and sending shockwaves through the valley. Explosions painted the night orange. Men scrambled, weapons abandoned, the convoy unraveling before her eyes. For a moment, it looked like she might do the impossible, turn the tide in a machine that should never have left the ground. And then she saw it. Past the burning wrecks, deeper in the column, something larger, meaner, moving steady while others broke. A mobile SAM system. Its turret turned like a predator catching scent. Lights flashed across its panel, hungry and certain. The hog wasn't the hunter anymore. A radar-locked tone screamed in her headset. Arden had seconds to choose. Fight, flee, or burn with the sky itself. The missile warning wasn't a sound. It was a blade, a shrill, metallic tone that cut straight through Arden's skull and into her bones. She knew it too well. The voice of a radar that had found her, measured her, and now sang a countdown to her death. Her hands didn't shake. They never had in a cockpit. She glanced at the panel. RWR lit up, a spike of energy painted right across her hog. That Sam wasn't a rumor anymore. It was staring her down. In combat, survival is measured in seconds, not plans. She rolled hard left, the hog groaning under G's that pressed her chest like a stone slab. The desert tilted. Smoke trails stretched across the horizon like scars. A hiss in her headset told her the missile had launched. She couldn't see it yet, but she could feel it. Missiles were like wolves. You always knew when they were coming for you. "Break! Break! Missile airborne!" a voice shouted over comms. The SEAL spotter on the ridge had seen it too. Arden yanked the throttles forward, engines screaming as she shoved the hog down toward the desert floor. Altitude bled fast. She skimmed the sand so low her landing gear warning howled. Dust plumed behind her like the tail of a comet.
The hog wasn't built for speed, not compared to the sleek jets that usually played this game, but it was built to take punishment. Arden threw chaff and flares out the back, sparks, heat, false trails. In her mirrors, the desert erupted in white fire as the missile's nose chased and then, mercifully, veered. It exploded off her left wingtip, a sunburst that rocked the hog sideways. Panels rattled. A warning light blinked, but the engines kept turning. Arden steadied her breath. That had been one. There would be more. Sam Cruz never carried just one. Down on the ridge, the SEALs had seen everything. Senior Chief's voice cracked across the net. "She's drawing fire. That system's hunting her. If she doesn't kill it, it kills all of us." Arden didn't need reminding. Her eyes locked on the convoy again. Flames marking her earlier kills. But past the wreckage, the SAM still sat, unbroken, unafraid. Its radar dish spun lazily, confident, waiting for her next move. She whispered to herself, not for comfort, but for rhythm. Checklist: fly the jet, kill the threat. Words drilled into her bones long before she was ever allowed to touch a trigger. The hog wasn't a stranger anymore. It was hers tonight, fully and absolutely. The roster said she was a mechanic. The battlefield said otherwise. She nosed the hog up, climbing hard, then rolled inverted to look down at the beast below. The SAM crew was fast, already rotating, already tracking. Arden leveled, dove again, and lined her pipper on the square shadow moving in the chaos. Her thumb brushed the trigger. A second lock tone screamed. Another missile cut loose. She had seconds. Instinct overruled everything. She dumped flares, yanked the stick back, and dragged the hog into a brutal climb that clawed the sky open. Her body crushed against the seat. Vision tunneled gray. The missile chased light and heat, veered wide and detonated below. The shock wave punched her, rattling every bolt in the airframe. Still, the hog flew. Her fuel warning screamed again. The gauge dropped into Red's basement. She was running on fumes. She'd get maybe one more pass. Maybe. On the ridge, the SEALs had gone quiet. They knew what a SAM could do. They also knew what she had already done. Turn their despair into possibility. But possibility wasn't enough. Not if that launcher kept breathing. Arden dropped back to the deck, sand scraping her belly at 200 feet. She could almost see the faces of the crew below, tiny shadows scrambling to reload. She had one run left, one trigger pull before gravity won and fuel ran dry. She reached up and touched the cracked panel just above her head, a ritual she had done on maintenance checks for years. Tonight, it was more than habit. It was a pact. "One more fight," she whispered.
throttle forward. Nose down, the Hog's engines bellowed, leaving trails of heat that danced like ghosts behind her. The SAM system loomed larger and larger in the canopy. She wasn't just flying at it, she was aiming her entire life at it. The locked tone wailed again, louder than ever. The crew below had her, fully painted. A third missile tube hissed open. The launch fire lit the desert floor. Arded lined the pipper. Time slowed. The Hog vibrated with rage, as if it too hated the math that said this wasn't possible. She squeezed. The GAA-8 erupted. The cannon's roar tore through the night. 30-millimeter shells shredding the darkness. Tracer lines walked across the sand, tearing into trucks, tearing into the SAM system's hull. The launcher exploded in a bloom of orange and steel, fire reaching for the sky. The missile never cleared its tube. The locked tone died. Silence rushed into her headset. Sometimes survival isn't about dodging the strike. It's about erasing the one who fired it. Down below, the SEALs erupted in cheers over comms. Raw voices carried on broken frequencies. Target destroyed. She did it. Even the colonel's voice cracked, awe replacing doubt. Dear God, she actually did it. But Arden didn't smile. Her eyes flicked back to the panel. The fuel gauge wasn't just low, it was gone. The warning light glared, merciless, unblinking. She was airborne on nothing but hope and fumes. The Hog climbed once more, wings steady against the wounded sky. Below, men who had given up on living now believed again. Above, one woman stared at a horizon that offered no promises. And then the engine coughed. A shudder rolled through the frame. The Hog's roar faltered, dipped. Arden's breath froze. The desert stretched endless ahead of her, but her machine had just whispered the truth. Time had run out. The Hog's cough wasn't subtle. It rattled through the cockpit like a death rattle, a vibration that carried more truth than any instrument could. Arden's eyes shocked to the gauges, but she didn't need them. She felt it in her bones. The tanks were dry. Her hands tightened on the stick. Training screamed at her. Aviate, navigate, communicate. But training never said what to do when you were already flying on the ghost of fumes. When the fuel runs out, you don't just lose altitude, you lose time. The desert stretched below her, wide and merciless. Flames still burned from the convoy she'd shredded, glowing scars across the valley floor. The SEALs were alive, for now. But without her in the sky, the next wave of armor would find them. And Arden knew what happened to soldiers without cover. She'd seen it before. That memory was the weight in her chest, heavier than gravity. The Hog dipped, protesting every second it stayed aloft. She coaxed it back, gentle hands guiding the stick like she was calming a wounded animal. Easy, girl. Just a little longer. She had always talked to her jets that way. Most laughed at her for it. Tonight, no one would. The radio crackled alive. "Pilot, this is Senior Chief. Are you hit? Your bird looks—" He stopped, static filling the gap where his words should have been. Maybe he saw the smoke trail curling from her engines. Maybe he didn't want to say what they both knew. She was dying up here. Arden clicked transmit. "Fuel's gone. One pass left. Maybe none." Her voice didn't shake. It was too calm, the kind of calm that comes when you've already accepted the odds. Silence followed. Even the colonel on the net had nothing to add. Sometimes the hardest part isn't facing death. It's knowing others are listening. She scanned the horizon. Beyond the burning wrecks, she caught it. Headlights, dust trails, another wave of vehicles pushing through the valley. Fresh armor, fresh troops, rolling straight through the SEAL position. They hadn't won yet. They'd just bought seconds. Her mind did the math. Altitude, distance, ammo count. The GA-8 still had rounds, But the Hog didn't have fuel for another climb. If she made this run, it was final. She wouldn't circle back. She wouldn't make it home. Her stomach turned, not from fear, but from memory. Years ago, back when she wore a different uniform, she had sworn she'd never sit in this seat. She had watched others go up, come back broken, and told herself she'd be the one to keep them flying, not to join them. Yet here she was, the last card in a deck no one believed she held. She pushed the thought away. Regret was for later, if there was a later. Throttle forward. Engines coughed, spit, but obeyed just enough. She angled toward the headlights, nose low, guns armed. Her breath came steady. In, out. The Hog responded like it understood. One more fight. Down on the ridge, the SEALs braced. They didn't know her name. They didn't know why she was in that cockpit, but they knew the truth. They were about to live or die with her trigger pull. Arden lined up the run. The convoy stretched across the sand. Dozens of targets, headlights cutting through the smoke. She picked the lead vehicles, the ones that kept the rest in line. Take out the head, the body stumbles. The lock tone didn't come this time. The SAM was gone, erased by her last burst. All that stood between her and impact was gravity itself. She squeezed. The GA-8 thundered. The night cracked open again. Tracer rounds carving fire across the convoy. Metal ripped apart. Trucks folded inward. Ammo cooking off in secondary blasts. The valley shook as fireballs clawed upward. Screams echoed in the chaos, drowned by the cannon's endless roar.
Her rounds chewed through steel until the belt finally clicked empty. Silence hit harder than recoil. The Hog was a glider now. Powerless. Empty. Falling. Victory means nothing if you don't survive to see it. The nose dipped, earth rushing up. Arden pulled back hard, trying to coax lift out of wings that had nothing left to give. The Hog shuddered, leveled just enough to keep from auguring in. Altitude bled fast. She had seconds, maybe less, before the desert claimed her. The radio came alive again. Senior Chief's voice, ragged, desperate. Bail out. Get out now. Her hand hovered over the ejection handle. She stared at it. The seat would fire. The chute would deploy. If she was lucky, she'd land somewhere in that burning valley. And then what? Capture? A fight with nothing but a sidearm? She'd seen what the enemy did to prisoners. Her eyes flicked to the ridge. The SEALs were still moving, regrouping, alive because of her. If she abandoned the Hog now, she might undo all of it. A crash in the wrong place could light them up, reveal their cover, pin them in. She wasn't sure she could do that to them. Not after dragging them this far back from the edge. She pressed the mic. Negative. Not yet. Her voice was iron. The Hog dipped again, engines spitting their last breaths. The desert floor rose fast. She scanned wildly. There, a dry riverbed cutting through the valley floor like a scar. Shallow enough to hit, long enough to try. Maybe. She pulled the nose toward the riverbed. The Hog's shadow stretched across the sand, closing fast. Arden's teeth clenched. This wouldn't be a landing. It would be survival written in fire. The Hog dropped into the desert like a wounded predator. Engines coughing smoke trails that glowed against the fire she'd already left behind. Arden's eyes narrowed on the scar of the riverbed, the only stretch of earth that looked remotely survivable. It wasn't a runway. It wasn't even level, but it was something, and something was better than nothing. Her hands moved with the steadiness of a surgeon. Stick back a hair, nose up just enough, throttle idle because there was nothing left to give. She trimmed the Hog with muscle memory, coaxing control surfaces that wanted to give up. At this speed, every breath counted. A real pilot isn't the one who takes off. It's the one who refuses to crash. The canopy shook,
as wind clawed at her. Dust blurred the world into a smear of orange and black. She lined up the riverbed, every second fighting gravity's grip. Sparks screamed as the hog's belly scraped the sand, metal shrieking like an animal being dragged to its knees. The landing gear alarms wailed, but Arden ignored them. She was past alarms.
Impact came hard. The hog skipped once, slammed again, skidded sideways in a storm of dirt and fire. Her head cracked against the seat, stars exploding across her vision. She gritted her teeth and rode the beast, keeping the nose from biting into the ground. One wing clipped a rock outcrop. The airframe jolted, metal tearing, panels shearing off into the night. And then finally, it stopped. The hog sat broken in the riverbed, smoke pouring from its engines, the shark-mouthed nose buried in sand. Silence returned, but it wasn't peace. It was the pause between thunderclaps. Arden's lungs burned. She forced herself to move. Harness release. Click. Canopy lever. Jammed. She slammed it again. The glass cracked and popped upward, spilling desert air into the cockpit. She hauled herself out, boots crunching on hot metal, knees trembling. For the first time in hours, she wasn't inside the hog. She was alone on the ground, staring at the stars through smoke. The radio on her vest crackled weakly. "Say again, Hog 1, do you copy?" It was Senior Chief. His voice carried urgency, but also something else, fear she hadn't survived. Arden grabbed the handset. "Copy, I'm down. Riverbed, south of the ridge." A pause, then a cheer through the static. "We see you! Hold position, we're coming!" Sometimes the mission isn't about killing. It's about staying alive long enough to be found. Arden's eyes swept the horizon. She had no illusions. The enemy wasn't done. Survivors from the convoy would be hunting now, moving toward the crash site. The fires from the wreck would be a beacon. She had minutes, maybe less, before they closed in. She yanked open a side panel on the hog, fingers finding what she knew would be there. Emergency pack. She pulled free the emergency carbine, a handful of mags, and a flare. Her hands moved with quiet efficiency, every motion learned from years of watching others prepare for nights they didn't always return from. The sound reached her before the sight. Engines, not hers, not friendly. Trucks grinding over sand, headlights cutting the smoke. Arden crouched behind the hog's broken wing, carbine braced tight, eyes on the shadows approaching. She had no cover worth mentioning, no escape, just a rifle, a flare, and the stubborn refusal to let tonight end with surrender. The headlights grew brighter, bouncing across the rough terrain. Voices shouted in a language she didn't need to understand. They knew where she was. They wanted her alive, or maybe they wanted proof they had killed the woman who had torn their convoy apart. Her finger tightened on the trigger. One against many. It wasn't a fair fight. But then again, none of tonight had been. Courage isn't measured by the size of your army. It's measured by what you do when you're outnumbered. The first figures broke from the shadows, armed, moving fast. Arden exhaled slow, sight steady. She squeezed. The carbine barked, muzzle flash tearing the dark. One enemy fell, another stumbled, the rest scattering. Bullets answered, striking sparks off the hog's carcass, tearing into sand around her. Arden rolled, fired again, shifting position to keep them guessing. Every round counted. Every second she held them here meant the SEALs had one more second to reach her. She could almost hear them pounding across the ridge, moving fast, fighting through exhaustion because they knew she was alive. The enemy regrouped. More voices, more headlights. She wasn't facing a patrol, she was facing a hunt. Ammunition thinned in her hands. Her chest heaved, throat raw from smoke.
But she didn't back down. She couldn't. Not after all this. She reached for the flare, thumb brushing the cap. One spark, one streak into the night sky, and the SEALs would know exactly where she was. But so would everyone else. Her jaw clenched. She glanced once at the Hog's ruined frame beside her, the machine that had carried her further than anyone thought possible. Then back at the flare, and then at the shadows closing in. Arden yanked the cap, struck the flare, and fire blazed red into the night. The desert lit up, and with it, every gun turned toward her. The flare ripped skyward, blazing red against the black desert sky. For a moment it looked almost holy, a pillar of fire telling the world she was still alive. Then the truth came crashing in. It was a beacon. Every weapon turned. Every voice howled her death. Arden ducked behind the Hog's torn fuselage, pressing herself against the broken metal as bullets chewed through steel and sand. The carcass of the jet had carried her further than anyone thought possible. Now, even in death, it shielded her one last time. She steadied her rifle, sighted through smoke, and fired. One shadow collapsed, then another, but the muzzle grew hot, the magazine lighter, and still they came. She wasn't fighting for victory anymore. She was fighting to leave proof she had stood. Headlights bounced closer, cutting through dust. Voices shouted in triumph, closing in. Arden's breathing slowed. If this was the end, she would make it cost them. She braced again, finger tightening on the trigger. And then she heard it. Footsteps behind her, rushing fast. Not enemy, different rhythm, sharper. A voice cracked across the night. On your left! The SEALs. They poured down the ridge like a storm breaking loose, rifles flashing, grenades tossing arcs of fire into the dark. Enemy fighters spun in confusion, torn between the wreck and the sudden fury sweeping in from above. Arden lifted her head, disbelief flashing across her face. She wasn't alone anymore.
The senior chief dropped beside her, firing short, brutal bursts. His helmet was dented, his eyes fierce. Thought we lost you, he growled. Arden smirked, despite the chaos. Not yet. He shoved a fresh magazine into her hand, then keep fighting. Together, they held the line. The Hog's shattered wing became their barricade, its torn skin sparking as rounds hammered into it. Arden fired again, her shoulder aching, her vision tunneling, every shot a refusal to give in. Around her, SEALs moved like shadows with teeth, cutting the hunters down until the desert echoed with silence. The flare hadn't just called rescue, it had called a reckoning. When the last echoes faded, Arden slumped against the Hog's flank. Her arms trembled, lungs dragging in smoke-thick air. The senior chief crouched beside her, pulling his helmet off. His face was streaked with dirt, his voice low. Colonel's never gonna believe this, but I know what I saw. You saved us. Arden glanced at the Hog, its nose buried in the sand, the shark-mouth grin chipped and smoking. Her throat tightened. She laid a hand on the scorched metal, whispering words no one else could hear. One more fight, and you gave it. The SEALs moved through the wreckage, tending to the wounded, collecting gear, watching the horizon. But every man who passed her stopped for a heartbeat, their eyes meeting hers, each one silently acknowledging the truth. The night hadn't been won by command or numbers. It had been held together by one woman who refused to stay in the shadows. The flare burned out above, fading into smoke. But in the valley, its light did not die. It lived on in the men who had seen her step forward when no one else dared, and in the legend of the Hog that roared one last time.